we started looking at inequality, and we did some large-scale surveys around the US and other countries. So we asked two questions. Do people know what kind of level of inequality we have? And then what level of inequality do we want to have? So let's think about the first question. Imagine I took all the people in the US and I sorted them from the poorest on the right to the richest on the left. And then I divided them into 5 buckets. The poorest 20%, the next 20%, the next, and the richest 20%. And then I asked you to tell me how much wealth do you think is concentrated in each of those buckets. So to make it simpler, imagine I asked you to tell me how much wealth do you think is concentrated in the bottom 2 buckets, the bottom 40%. Take a second, think about it and have a number. Usually we don't think. Think for a second, have a real number in your mind. You have it? Okay, here is what lots of Americans tell us. They think that the bottom 20% have about 2.9% of the wealth. The next group has 6.4, so together it's slightly more than 9. The next group, they say, has 12%, 20. And the richest 20%, people think, have 58% of the wealth. And you can see how this relates to what you thought. Now, what's reality? Reality is slightly different. The bottom 20% have 0.1% of the wealth. The next 20% have 0.2% of the wealth. Together, it's 0.3. The next group has 3.9, 11.3. And the richest group has 85% of the wealth. So what we actually have and what we think we have are very different. What about what we want? How do we even figure this out? So to look at this, to look at what we really want, we thought about the philosopher John Rawls. If you remember John Rawls, he had this notion of what's a just society. He said that just society is a society that if you knew everything about it, you would be willing to enter it in a random place. And it's a beautiful definition, right? Because if you're wealthy, you might want the wealthy to have more money, the poor to have less. If you're poor, you might want more equality. But if you're going to go into that society in every possible situation and you don't know, you have to consider all the aspects. It's a little bit like blind tasting, in which you don't know what the outcome would be when you make a decision. And Rawls called this the veil of ignorance. So we took another large group of Americans, and we asked them the question in veil of ignorance. What is the characteristics of a country that would make you want to join it, knowing that you could end randomly in any place? And here is what we got. What did people want to give to the first group, the bottom 20%? They wanted to give them about 10% of the wealth. The next group, 14% of the wealth, 21, 22, and 32. Now, nobody in our sample wanted full equality, right? Nobody thought that socialism is a fantastic idea in our sample. But what does it mean? It means that we have this knowledge gap between what we have and what we think we have, but we have at least as a big gap between what we think is right to what we think we have. Now, we can ask this question, by the way, not just about wealth, we can ask it about other things as well. So, for example, we asked people from different parts of the world about this question. People who are liberals and conservatives, and they gave us basically the same answer. We asked rich and poor, they gave us the same answer. Men and women, NPR listeners and Forbes readers. We asked people in England, Australia, the US, very similar answers. We even asked the different departments of a university. We went to Harvard and we checked almost every department. And the fact from Harvard Business School, where a few people wanted the wealthy to have more and the rich to have less, the similarity was astonishing. I know some of you went to Harvard Business School.
And yet in the world, there are so many people who still heat the water on fire and they cook their food on fire. Sometimes they don't even have enough food. And they live below the poverty line. There are 2 billion fellow human beings who live on less than $2 a day. And the richest people over there, that's 1 billion people, and they live above what I call the airline. Because they have spent more than $80 a day, on their consumption. But this is just 1, 2, 3 billion people. And obviously there are 7 billion people in the world, so there must be 1, 2, 3, 4 billion people more who live in between the poverty line and the airline. They have electricity. But the question is, how many have washing machines? I've done a scrutiny of market data, and I found that indeed the washing machine has penetrated below the airline, and today there's an additional 1 billion people up there who live above the wash line. And they consume for more than $40 per day. So 2 billion have access to washing machine, and the remaining 5 billion, how do they wash? Or to be more precise, how do most of the women in the world wash? Because it remains a hard work for women to wash. But when I lecture to environmentally concerned students, they tell me, no, everybody in the world cannot have cars and washing machines. How can we tell this woman that she ain't going to have a washing machine? And then I ask my students, I've asked them over the last 2 years, I've asked, how many of you doesn't use a car? And some of them proudly raise their hand, and say, I don't use a car. And then I put the really tough question. How many of you hand wash your jeans and your bed sheet? And no one raised their hand. Even the hardcore in the green movement use washing machine. So how come something that everyone uses and they think others will not stop it? What is special with it?
I also believe that in many parts of this country, and certainly in many parts of this globe, that the opposite of poverty is not wealth. I don't believe that. I actually think in too many places, the opposite of poverty is justice. And finally, I believe that despite the fact that it is so dramatic and so beautiful and so inspiring and so stimulating, we will ultimately not be judged by our technology. We won't be judged by our design. We won't be judged by our intellect and reason. Ultimately, you judge the character of a society, not by how they treat the rich and the powerful and the privileged, but by how they treat the poor, the condemned, the incarcerated. Because it's in that nexus that we actually begin to understand truly profound things about who we are.
These days, it feels like Islamophobia is a socially acceptable form of bigotry. We just have to put up with it and smile. The nasty stares, the palpable fear when boarding a plane, the random pat-downs at airports that happen 99% of the time. It doesn't stop there. We have politicians reaping political and financial gains off our backs. Here in the US, we have presidential candidates like Donald Trump casually calling to register American Muslims and ban Muslim immigrants and refugees from entering this country. It is no coincidence that hate crimes rise in parallel with election cycles. What resources and expertise do you bring to the table? Are you willing to step into your discomfort and speak up when you witness hateful bigotry? Will you be Neil? Many neighbors appeared in this story, and you, in your respective communities, all have a Muslim neighbor, colleague, or friend your child plays with at school. Reach out to them. Let them know you stand with them in solidarity. It may feel really small, but I promise you, it makes a difference.
Biases are the stories we make up about people before we know who they actually are. But how are we going to know who they are when we've been told to avoid and be afraid of them? So I'm going to tell you to walk toward your discomfort. And I'm not asking you to take any crazy risks. I'm saying just do an inventory. Expand your social and professional circles. Just like, who's in your circle? Who's missing? How many authentic relationships do you have with young black people, folks, men, women, or any other major difference from who you are and how you roll, so to speak? Because you know what? There may be, just look around your periphery. There may be somebody at work, in your classroom, in your house of worship, somewhere. There's some black young guy there. And you're nice. You say hi. I'm saying go deeper, closer, further. And build the kinds of relationships, the kinds of friendships that actually cause you to see the holistic person and to really go against the stereotypes. I know some of you are out there, I know, because I have some white friends in particular, they will say, you have no idea how awkward I am. Like, I don't think this is going to work for me. I'm sure I'm going to blow this. Okay, maybe, but this thing is not about perfection. It's about connection. And you're not going to get comfortable before you get uncomfortable. I mean, you just have to do it. And young black men, what I'm saying is if someone comes your way genuine and authentically, take the invitation. Not everyone is out to get you. Go looking for those people who can see your humanity. You know, it's the empathy and the compassion that comes out of having relationships with people who are different from you. Something really powerful and beautiful happens. You start to realize that they are you, that they're part of you, that they are in your family.